Good morning. What's the Jewish view on the law of attraction? Lately, it's a very popular topic. The concept of you could attract things to you, particularly in the world of the mind, how you think about stuff and what you focus on. You attract certain things to you. Does Judaism have anything to say about it? Is there any validity to this? Is it just a hocus pocus? Let's analyze that today in connection with today's parsha and try to understand it. Just gonna wait for Facebook to kick in here, or maybe we won't wait. Okay, those of you that are watching online, on YouTube, on Facebook, once you get on, feel free to ask questions. We'll try to address it, share it. If you didn't subscribe yet to the channel, I recommend you do so. I want to begin today with a very strange Talmudic law. It's a law in the Gemara which comes from today's parsha in connection with today's Torah portion, and it's a law, an halacha, which seems to contradict everything that we know is the value of Torah, the value and the principles of Yiddishkeit, and that is the idea of compassion, of kindness, of assistance. And here's the law. Torah tells us as follows. If a person needs to bring a korban, he has to bring an offering, there is a certain prescription of what he has to bring. Certain animals are brought for certain korbanos, certain amounts of animals are brought for other korbanos, and so on. And it depends. Sometimes it's an animal that's accompanied with wine and oil, sometimes with a meal offering. Depending on what the transgression was or what the person is trying to accomplish, he has different recipes for the offering. In 6 instances, Torah instructs that an offering be made for an atonement of something. But it's not a uniform korban. It depends on the person, depends on their means. If the individual is wealthy, they bring one type of offering. If they're less wealthy, if they're poor, if they can't afford it, there's a different type of offering that they bring. And Torah tells us what these are. Let's take a look. A woman after childbirth is obligated to bring 2 offerings, a lamb and a dove. Okay, she had a baby, she brings a lamb and a dove. If, however, she's poor, she's to bring 2 doves instead. As you see in the beginning of this week's parsha, it's in the first section. Keves ben shnasei lo'ela uven yena yisrael lechatas al pesach al-omed el ha'kayin. And then the parsha tells us in pasuk ches that if she can't afford it, let's look at the translation. If she cannot afford a sheep, she should take 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves, one as a burnt offering and one as a sin offering. Okay, it's not turtles, but it's doves. Okay. And so Torah is sensitive to the financial situation of the person and says, if they can't afford the lamb and the dove, bring 2 doves instead. Okay, that's a woman who had a baby. Now, this is a general question. Why, if a woman had a baby, does she have to bring an offering altogether? Is this a thanks offering, thanking Hashem for having a child? For that gift? Exactly. Why is it called a sin offering? There's an interesting explanation which says as follows. While a woman is going through the difficulty of having a baby, the pain and the anguish involved, she makes a promise. I'm never doing this again. Obviously, once the baby is born, she regrets that promise. And she says, this is the greatest gift. However, in her mind, even though it was under distress, she felt like never again. Torah requires her to bring an atonement for that, quote, promise that I'll never have a child again. Now, even though usually we say if a person made a promise under distress, it was something which they weren't really thinking straight. If they knew how it would feel afterwards, if they knew what a great blessing this would be, they maybe would have not made that promise. Nonetheless, because she did say it, Torah says, bring a sin offering. And obviously, she's absolved. She could, with God's help, have more children. But Torah understands that not everyone could afford the same thing, and if she can't afford the if she can't afford the two animals, bring one animal and one dove. Okay, let's take a second scenario: a cured mitzayra. We're learning in this week's portion the concept of a leper. Now, it's erroneously translated as leprosy. It's not. It's a spiritual condition which shows up on the skin as in a physical way. But if a person would speak negative about someone else, lashon hara, he would speak ill about someone else, then there are three forms of tzaras that he could receive. It could happen on his house. He finds a spot on the wall of the house. It could happen on his clothing. He would find something, God forbid, on the person's clothing, a certain spot, or on their own skin. We're not going to get into all the details here, but the person becomes ritually impure, and then in order to purify himself, he goes through a process of being quarantined, taken out of the camp of where everyone else is living, a constant process. Once he is better and he's healed, he's cured spiritually, and the spotting was reduced, he now brings an offering. Okay, it's an offering for atonement. What does he have to bring? 2 lambs and a female sheep. But if he's poor, if this person can't afford to do that, then he could bring a lamb and 2 doves. Okay? So if you're wealthy, you bring 2 lambs and a female sheep. And if not, then you bring a lamb and 2 doves. So again, Torah recognizes if a person can't afford it, we still want to give him the opportunity to atone for himself. And we say, bring a offering, a carbon of lesser value. Okay. Then there are someone who makes a mistake. He transgressed a witness oath. It's a lesser type of oath, but he said something which it was incorrect. It's considered to be a mistake, and he has to bring an offering. Or he inadvertently swears falsely. Okay, witness oath or swearing something in court improperly by mistake, he brings a carbon, he brings an offering. Someone who entered the Beis Hamikdash by mistake while he was in a state of impurity. We know that you can't enter the Beis Hamikdash, you can't enter the temple if you are impure, but if a person did it by mistake, there's an offering that he brings. And finally, someone who eats sacred food, kodshim, certain foods have a holy status to them, whether it's part of an offering, a sacrifice, whether it's one of the gifts that belong to the kohen, whatever it may be. A person ate from it by mistake and he was ritually impure, then there are 3 steps of a carbon. You asked earlier if there's a middle ground. There is a middle ground, okay? The most affluent brings a female sheep or a female goat. That's what they bring, if you could afford it. If you can't afford it, then a pair of doves. Can't afford, bring 2 doves. It's also good. And thirdly, if a person really can't afford it, bring a meal offering. Something, it's flour. It's a mixture of several things together, but it's not even a dove. So animals is number 1. Birds, if you can't afford that. And if you even can't afford that, then there is meal offering. So again, we see that Torah wants people to have the opportunity to atone. It's actually a mitzvah. It's a requirement. They have to atone for it. You have to bring an offering to the Beis Hamikdash. It's a whole other class of why we do animals in the first place. However, if a person can't afford it, then we have levels of what they should bring instead. Okay. Here's the interesting law. The individual has to bring the carbon. Okay? But what happens if someone else comes along and says, I want to take care of your carbon for you. You went into the Beis Hamikdash while you were impure by mistake. I feel bad. My gift. Let me bring the offering instead of you. In your honor, I'll bring it. That's fine. Okay? You could bring it on behalf of the other person, and they still achieve their atonement because it's done for you. That's the halacha. Okay? The question is as follows. What happens if you are a very wealthy person and you find out that your friend who is poor is responsible to bring an offering? What do you have to bring? Do you have to bring the offering of a rich man or the offering of a poor man? Okay? Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, nice Jewish boy. He's has a friend who's not so wealthy, who made a couple of mistakes. He has to bring an offering. He comes and says, listen, I got you covered. And he wants to bring the offering. Should he bring an offering like a poor man, which is probably a handful of flour and a couple other mixtures, and atone for it? Or does he have to go and bring the two, the female sheep or the female goats? Anyone? Any opinions? By the way, if you're watching this, you could comment, or if you're watching on the replay, you could comment.
I'm guessing the rich man's offering.
The rich man should bring the rich man's offering. Okay, so let's look at the Rambam, Maimonides, and he says like this in the laws of Mechutzei Kapara. He says, Ashir, a wealthy man who said that the carbon of this mitzvah is upon me, I'll take care of the leper's offering that he has to bring. And the mitzvah was a poor person, he has to bring a wealthy carbon. You're the one bringing it, even though you're bringing it for a poor man. The law is, you have to bring a wealthy man's offering. Okay. Makes sense. Okay. What happens if a poor man comes along and he says, I know that my banker made a mistake and he has to bring an offering, and he's a very wealthy man? Do I bring his level of offering, or do I bring my level of offering? His level. Okay, so you're all for the double standard. Torah comes in. It's a single standard. Okay. Well, here's the perplexing thing. The Rambam tells us, you're absolutely right. The Rambam says like this: if a poor person comes along and says, I have a rich uncle and he messed up, I want to take care of his offering. I don't, by the way. I have rich uncles, but not ones that didn't mess up. If I want to take care of somebody that messed up, you don't, and you're poor, you bring the rich man's offering.
Because you can't afford it.
You can't afford it. Now we have a problem. We would think the whole idea of this is that Torah is sensitive to your income level or your tax bracket. And here we say, wait, it depends. If you're rich and you're bringing for a poor man, bring it the rich way. If you're poor and you're stepping in for a rich man, bring it for the poor way, for the rich way as well. Okay. Okay, if you made a mistake, you're saying there's ways around it. Fair enough.
One's a kiyuv, one's not a kiyuv, for starters.
Okay.
Extra credit is extra
Okay,
credit.
but if the entire offering is determined on the person that's bringing it,
Evidently
then
it's
okay.
not.
Okay, there is logic to the other way, but it doesn't come across as a very fair way of doing things.
So what's
Okay.
the way around?
Well, if a rich man comes along and he says, I want to take care of this person's offering, let him. Don't raise the price because he has more money. This person is required. In other words, decide how you want to look at this. Do you want to look at this and say the sinner is the one that has to pay, so it goes according to his means? Or do you want to look at it and say the sponsor has to pay for it, it's according to their means? But when you flip it based on where you earn more, right? It's like the famous joke. The fellow was teaching the salesman in the eyeglass store. The owner was teaching the new salesman how to sell glasses. He says, when they come inside and he puts on the glasses, he asks you how much it is. Say $200. If he doesn't jump, then say for the frames. How much are the lenses? You tell him it's $200. If he doesn't jump, say each. Okay, that's. It seems like you're just playing games based on what the person could afford. Why should we say that? Okay. The answer to this question is a very powerful answer, and it teaches us a lot about Torah's view on, as I mentioned, the law of attraction. And it's another great example of how you find a law in Torah, which seems to be about offering sacrifice as something quite doesn't apply yet in our lifetime. Mashiach comes hopefully today, we'll have a temple, but for now we don't have a temple, and we don't bring korbanos. And yet this detail about a wealthy man bringing for a poor man, or a poor man bringing for a wealthy man, sheds tremendous light on some very important truths about life. Okay, the Rebbe gave this explanation at a talk that he gave after the month of Tishrei, the month of holidays, when many guests came from Eretz Yisrael and from elsewhere, from Israel, to visit and be with the Rebbe. And the Rebbe gave this explanation, and he said as follows: the moment a person decides he wants to give an offering for a wealthy man, he now becomes like a wealthy man. Torah now looks at you like a rich person. Okay? Wealth is not just a material thing. It's not. It's not whether you have money or you don't have money. Wealth is a state of mind. Okay? Do you see yourself as essentially poor, or do you see yourself as essentially rich? That's how Torah views it. Do I see myself as a poor man, or do I see myself as a wealthy man? That's how Torah views it. Okay? Do you believe that you could achieve success, or that you're destined to failure? Okay? This is a tremendous concept. Torah looks at the person and says, not how much money does he have in his pocket or in his bank or under his mattress now, but rather Torah comes and says, what's his mindset? If a poor man comes along and he says, I want to go and bring an offering for the rich man, we look at him and we say, no problem. You want to step into his shoes? You need to bring the wealthy one. Oh, he doesn't have. It's not about how much he has. Okay. The Gemara tells us in Nidarim, Daf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, and I want to lift it here for all my bookmarks are coming out. I want to lift it here for the screen to see. It says like this: Ein oni ela b'deya. Okay, the Gemara in Nidarim Daf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph says there is no such thing as a poverty, as a poor person. It's only in the mind. Okay, it's a very, very powerful statement. Or to properly translate this, poverty is a mindset. Mem Aleph Amud Aleph 41a, top third of the page. The concept is that the Gemara tells us, Ein ani ela b'das, a poor person. Poverty is a mindset. Okay, and therefore, let's go back. And therefore,
What is the context?
We'll get to some of the context in a moment and who said it. But the idea is that when a person wants to bring an offering for a rich person, even though he's poor, Torah says, bring it to the rich man's level. Even though if you had to bring the offering on your own, you would bring a totally different offering because you can't afford it. But because you're behaving or doing something for the rich person, and you have that mindset, we're requiring you to bring to his level. So it's not a double standard. This is the standard. It's what's your mindset, not how much money you have in the bank. Okay. By the way, you know who said this? Who said this statement? Ein ani ela b'deya. This was an Amira by the name of Abaye. Okay. Put it into context here. Abaye lived about between 280 and 340 of the Common Era. Okay. So we're now 2019 in most places in the world. So we're 2019. He lived in the year, let's just say 300 of the Common Era. Okay.
What is the subject?
One second. So Abaye was a person whose father's name was Chayil or Kail. Okay. And he passed away while his mother was pregnant with him. He never saw his father. And shortly after his birth, a little while later, his mother passed away. So this Abaye grew up a complete orphan. He was raised by his uncle, Rabba, who raised him. And he was a very, very poor person. Okay? And despite his extraordinary spiritual status, he was the dean of the yeshiva in his time, in Pumbedisa. But nonetheless, he's the one that comes along and says, poverty, it's in the mind. He was a truly rich man. He wasn't rich physically, he didn't have money, but he comes along and he says that wealth is it's a mindset. Okay, his brilliance, his wisdom, his depth, all this was remarkable what he had.
Yeah, but often it's physical, and the poor man have to offer.
100%. No one asked him to go and make a pledge. But the point is, when he's coming along and he's saying, I want to pay for somebody, all of a sudden we switch his status around. Not because we want to earn more from him, but because we understand that, as the Talmud tells us, Ein ani ela b'deya. Poverty is in the mind.
I understand. But he should be able to produce this high offering, like 2 lambs.
Okay. Practically, we have a question of how he's going to take care of it. But the lesson is still very powerful. of how Torah views the person. Okay, ordinary riches could be stolen. Right, the mindset riches cannot be stolen. There's a certain level that a person has in their mind, which you're in control of. Okay, without getting into it right now, but Viktor Frankl has a book, right, and he talks about the time when he was in, they're going through the Holocaust, and a lot of it is about the mind. The Rebbe encouraged them, by the way, to publish it and so on. But the idea is that it's man's search for meaning. Man's search for meaning. Man's search for meaning. So the concept is like this: that, as the Gemara tells us, Einan Yela B'deya, and who's saying it? A very poor person. Okay. This is the attitude that Torah wants us to have. This is the approach Torah wants us to take when it comes to wealth and when it comes to poverty. Not to measure only what's going on right now in my pocket, but to have a broadness in the mind, to be optimistic, to try to look at something with a positive and hopeful approach, not from a lens of scarcity, but from a lens of expansiveness. This is a concept that we find a lot in the Rebbe's letters, where the Rebbe insists and encourages that we should look at things from a broad way, from a positive way, from an angle of big, successful, good, not less. Okay. Now, I want to bring an example how this would apply in education. A person has a child. You could focus on what your child is lacking and say, you have to improve this, you have to improve that. You're not behaving in this place, this is not good. Or you could look at the positive. And you could try to build what they already have and focus on that. I'll give you an example. A child comes home with a report card. And the report card perhaps has certain areas there which are not perfect. Nobody's perfect. Okay? And it says your math is failing. You could sit the child down and say, you got to fix your math. We'll get you a tutor and we'll solve this problem. Or you could say, look, I see here that in reading, you're getting an A. In science, you've improved from last semester. Your behavior, it says here, is great. Your cleanliness is, I see that when you put your mind to something, you really do very well. Maybe you don't have to say anything about the math. Or you could say it after you've mentioned all the great things that they've done. You built this child up. You gave them the confidence. You gave them the hope that they really could be good. Instead of coming in and saying, this is bad, that's bad, and they feel to themselves, I'm a failure, I can never do it. And by the way, it's not just children, it's in any relationship. When you want to bring something out, you could look at it from the negative, and you may be 100% right, but you probably won't be effective. If you want to be effective, take the success, take the positive, build that, develop that. And then you could talk about the areas that have to be improved. But you show the person that they have a lot that they could strive for, and that they're a success story. You're not coming and saying to the child, you're an angel, you're a tzaddik, you're God's gift to humanity. Maybe that's not true. Well, everyone is God's gift to humanity. But you're not the greatest, you have flaws, and you don't have to lie, but find those areas that are good. Talk about those things that are positive. Bring out those good things that the child is doing. Build up what they have. The poor person that comes and says, I want to bring the offering of a rich man, he is now talking and behaving like a wealthy person. I'm not suggesting to be irresponsible and just to make pledges that you can't afford and behave like a wealthy man and swipe your credit card and all these other irresponsible things. No. But in your mind, don't focus on the negative, on the lack, on the scarcity. Focus on what's good, what's the opportunities that are available, the potential. Look at that. I want to share a story. It's one of my favorite stories from when I was a child. And some of my children, it's their favorite story as well. They keep on asking for it. It's a story about the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, was one of the things that he did was raise money to help Jews that were in captivity. In those times, one of the difficulties that the Jewish people faced is that we weren't allowed to own land. So if you want to make a living, a very common way to make a living was to rent an inn from an innkeeper and pay him rent every month, and then you could sell liquor or have a couple of rooms where people could stay over, a little modern day Airbnb, whatever they had back then. But you could have you could produce a little bit of income. The problem was very often these innkeepers, Jewish innkeepers, did not have enough money to pay their rent, whether they were dependent on the weather, whether there were other circumstances, they weren't able to pay. And these landlords were really governors or almost noblemen of the areas. They had full control over this person. They would just lock him up, put him in a dungeon, sometimes him and his family, and say, until you don't produce the money, I'm not letting you out. Now, you can't work when you're in a dungeon. And the people around their community had no money. In many cases, this was a person that lived in an area which had no community. He was the only Jew for miles around. So the Alter Rebbe would travel, and he would raise funds to help these people. It's one of the greatest mitzvahs, pidyon shvuyim, releasing a person from captivity. It's one of the greatest mitzvahs you could do. The Alter Rebbe comes to a particular city, and he goes to the leaders of the community, and he says, we have to raise funds. They said, okay, here's a list of all the people in town, and we put stars next to the ones that we think could perhaps help a little bit more, and let's go, and we'll come with you. We'll raise money for our fellow Jews in need. The Alter Rebbe says, is everybody on this list? Yeah, everyone's on this list. You're sure? Yeah. Are you positive? They said, well, there is one other person on this list, but don't waste your time. What do you mean? He's a very, very wealthy man, but he doesn't give anything to charity to anybody. It doesn't matter. It could be the greatest cause. It could be the most heartbreaking story, gut-wrenching situation. He does not give money. Alter Rebbe said, put him on the list and put him on the top of the list. We're going to him first. Okay, now these people were very uncomfortable because they're going to walk with the Alter Rebbe and they know what happens. The poor guy who does end up knocking on this mansion and does ask this fellow for money gets always the same response. He has this penny, a kopek that he gives. It's a rusty kopek. It's the same kopek he gives every time because the poor person that gets a kopek from this person standing in this huge mansion throws it back at his face. That's what you gave me after I tell my whole story. So they didn't want to go there. They didn't want Alter Rebbe to be embarrassed, to be humiliated. So they tried to, what should they do? They start walking towards this mansion. And the Alter Rebbe says, please, don't say a word. I'll do the talking. So they come to the house. They knock on the door. He says, oh, can I help you? He says, yes, I'm here raising funds. Come on in, come on in. They come inside. He sits them down in a plush living room. And he says, tell me what your issue is. Alter Rebbe goes on to say that there was a family not far from here that was arrested or locked up by their landlord because they can't pay the rent, and it's not their fault. They was the weather, this and that. We have to help them. We're here to. How much do you need? I need 5,000 rubles. 5,000 rubles. The guy says, I want to help. And he goes back, and you could hear there's a safe turning back and forth, and he comes out with a small pouch, and he puts his hand in the pouch and takes out a kopek. And he gives it to the Alter Rebbe. The people on the side, they're looking down. They're humiliated beyond. There's a great rabbi, came to their town, and the Alter Rebbe looks at the penny, looks at the fellow, and says, thank you very much. God should bless you. You should have health and success. He gave him a whole blessing. And then he wrote him a receipt that we received a kopek from you. He gives it to him. He shakes his hand. He thanks him again. And he shows him the door. As they're walking out of the door, the door closes behind them, and the Alter Rebbe again tells these two fellows with him, don't say a word and don't look back. And they walk away, and turns around, he walks back in, come inside. Sit down. They sit again in the same plush living room, and he says, how much did you say you needed? He said 5,000 rubles. 5,000 rubles. And the man is pacing back and forth. Hold on, I want to help a little bit more. And he goes into his the other room, and you hear the safe turning back and forth. And he comes out with a whole bunch of money, and he gives them 1,000 rubles. He says, here's 1,000 rubles. Please count it again. I want to help. Again, the Alter Rebbe gives him a warm thank you and heaps blessings upon him and proceeds to write him a receipt. And as he says goodbye again and thanks him, he walks out. And again, he murmurs to the two people next to him, don't say a word, don't look back. And they leave. And as they get to the outer gate, they hear shouting, sir, rabbis, come here, come here. Comes back in, he sits down in the same plush living room. And he says, I want to tell you a story. Many, many years ago, I wasn't wealthy. And I once encountered somebody who needed help. And all I had was a penny, a kopek. But I gave it to him. And I gave it to him genuinely from my whole heart. And I gave it to this person. He looked at me, looked at the penny, and he threw it back in my face. And I said, if that's the gratefulness, I'm never going to give more than this kopek until I get a proper thank you, acknowledgement, appreciation. And thank God life was good, and I've earned a lot of money, and I'm very successful, and I have this beautiful mansion, and people come all the time. Well, frankly, they stopped coming because the word got out there that all I give is a kopek. But I've given this kopek so many times. It's rusty. I've given it so many times. I save it. They throw it back to me. I bend down, I pick it up, and I give it to the next person that asks. You are the first person in decades that took this kopek from me, didn't throw it back in my face. You thanked me. You blessed me. What did the Alter Rebbe do here? He showed this person, you're a giver. You're kind. You are good. You have the capacity. You have the desire. He brought out the positive side of him, the success. The rest of the story is that he went and he paid the whole thing, the whole 5,000 rubles, and he changed his ways completely. He started giving more, and he opened his home, and he became a very generous person. The Alter Rebbe was showing there's much more than meets the eye. There's a lot deeper here. We could make a decision in our own lives and say, I'm going to look at the negative. I'm going to focus on the lack. I'm going to hone in on the scarcity. Or we could look at the positive. Well, how did we begin this class? And sorry, on Facebook, we missed the beginning, but on YouTube, it's there. You could watch it. I encourage you to search Levi Notik on YouTube, and you'll find it. But the beginning of the class is basically as follows. If a poor person wants to bring a rich man's offering, he wants to take care of his obligation, he can, as long as he pays his level, which is the rich man's level of an offering. And if the rich man wants to give a poor man's offering, he also pays the rich man. And it's not a double standard, because Torah says if this poor man is stepping into the rich man's shoes and he's thinking that way and he's looking from that angle, then let's treat him like a rich man. Because wealth is in the mind. Wealth is a mindset. Or to use the term of the Talmud, ein ani ela b'deya. Poverty is in the mind. Yes, the Darnam page Mem Aleph. I want to share another example of this. In 1985, the Rebbe had a F.R.E.E, and the Rebbe wanted to publish the works of the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. It's an important work on Jewish law, and it wasn't cheap. It had to be prepared for press, it had to be published and printed, and it was expensive. And the Rebbe asked a particular individual if he wants to contribute for this. And the person was honored, and he said, yes, I want to sponsor this whole printing of these books, make it available to the Jewish world. It was a tremendous contribution to Jewish scholarship and Jewish law, and he said, I want to pay for it. And he did. And the Rebbe blessed him. And after this work was published, this individual made a lot of money. He made money in business enough to pay for everything that he spent and had a lot left over to enjoy. And the Rebbe shared and said like this, that when this Jew made the commitment, when he pledged to do it, he couldn't afford it. He went beyond his means in a responsible way, but it was beyond his means, beyond what he normally would consider giving and beyond what he really can. But he said, I'm going to take the approach of wealth, of expansiveness. And the Eibishter saw it, and he blessed him, and he gave him not only the ability to do it, but actually to be wealthy. Very often we look at a challenge, a situation, and we say, I can't do it. It's not me. I don't have, forget money for a second. I don't have the means, the ability. It's not who I am. It's asking too much from me, whether it's an amount of learning or it's in connection to mitzvahs or it's helping someone else out. We say, it's not my personality. It's not my thing. I can't bring myself to do that. I don't have what it takes. Sometimes what we have to do is just decide that you're going to do it. Put your mind to it. Say that you will. Focus. And you'll see opportunities and abilities that open up for us. Don't spend more than you earn, but think in a expansive way. Use the mind. Remember what the Talmud tells us, that wealth is a mindset. Thank you for joining. Have a wonderful day.
So, keep wondering what is the subject and the